America likes to congratulate itself for abolishing slavery, but the Constitution still contains a sentence that makes that claim dishonest. The 13th Amendment, the supposed moral break with the nation's original sin, ends slavery except as a punishment for crime. That exception is not a footnote. It is the hinge on which the entire modern carceral state turns. It is the legal mechanism that allowed slavery to mutate rather than disappear, shifting from plantations to prisons, from private ownership to state custody, from chains to handcuffs. The story of mass incarceration is not a story of crime. It is a story of caste, engineered through criminalization and justified by constitutional loophole that has never been closed. Some people have called the punishment clause America's most successful legal workaround. The 13th Amendment's punishment clause created a constitutional category of people who could still be enslaved, the incarcerated. Once that exception existed, the incentive was obvious. If slavery was no longer legal for free people, then the state would simply manufacture criminals. Immediately after the Civil War, Southern legislatures passed black codes, laws designed to arrest black Americans for supposed offenses like vagrancy, loitering, or failing to show proof of employment. These laws were not about public safety, they were about labor. Once arrested, black men could be leased out to plantations, mines, and railroads under the system of convict leasing, a regime so brutal that even former slaveholders admitted it was worse than slavery. The logic was simple. Slavery was illegal, but forced labor for criminals was not. So the state created criminals. This was not a temporary aberration. This was the blueprint. From black codes to Jim Crow, criminalization was used as a form of racial sorting. When black codes became politically untenable, Jim Crow took their place. Segregation was enforced not only through social custom but through criminal law. Disorderly conduct, insulting gestures, and disturbing the peace became tools to police black mobility and autonomy. Chain gangs, the public face of Jim Crow punishment, made the connection between race, criminalization, and labor unmistakable. Black men in striped uniforms shackled together, breaking rocks under armed guard. This was not justice, it was a message. The message was that black freedom was conditional, revocable, and always subject to the state's power to redefine black life as criminality. Then came the civil rights backlash. It brought colorblind language, but the same caste logic. The civil rights movement forced America to abandon explicit racial hierarchy, but it did not force America to abandon the desire for hierarchy itself. The solution was to shift from race-based control to race-neutral criminal control. Law and order became the new political language of caste. The targets were the same communities. The mechanisms were the same: surveillance, policing, punishment. But now the justification was crime, not race. This rhetorical shift allowed the state to maintain racial control while claiming moral high ground. The war on drugs completed the transformation. Despite similar rates of drug use across racial groups, Black Americans were policed, arrested, charged, and sentenced at vastly higher rates, then blamed for the epidemic of drugs. Mandatory minimums, three-strike laws, and the crack powder sentencing disparity created a pipeline into prison that was both racially targeted and legally insulated from accusations of discrimination. The caste system had been updated for the modern era. And that ushered in the era of mass incarceration, the caste system at scale. Today, the United States imprisons more people than any nation on earth. Not because Americans are uniquely criminal, but because the system is uniquely structured to produce criminals. Mass incarceration functions as a racial caste system in four interlocking ways. First, criminalization replaces race as the marker of caste. Once labeled a felon, a person loses access to employment, housing, voting rights, and social legitimacy. The label becomes a permanent identity, a civic death sentence. Second, policing concentrates surveillance in Black communities. Stop and frisk, traffic stops, drug sweeps, and predictive policing algorithms create high contact zones where Black people are far more likely to be arrested for the same behaviors that go unpoliced in white neighborhoods. Third, courts and sentencing lock people into the system. Bail, plea deals, mandatory minimums, and sentencing disparities ensure that once the system touches you, it rarely lets go. And fourth, prison labor extracts economic value. The punishment clause allows states and corporations to compel incarcerated people to work for pennies or nothing under threat of punishment. This is not rehabilitation, it is exploitation. The result is a caste system that is both racialized and economically profitable to those in charge of it. And those economics of caste are exactly why the system persists. The prison industrial complex is not a metaphor, it is an economy. Prison labor is the cheapest labor in America. Incarcerated workers earn between 0 and 52 cents per hour with no right to refuse, no right to unionize, and no labor protections. States rely on this labor to run prisons, fight wildfires, maintain roads, and produce goods. Corporations contract with prison industries for manufacturing, packaging, call centers, and agriculture. Rural communities depend on prisons as employers. Private prison companies profit from full beds. Correctional officer unions lobby for harsher sentencing. Politicians win elections by promising to be tough on crime. This is not incidental, it is structural. The punishment clause created a labor market that requires a steady supply of incarcerated people. And because policing is racially targeted, the supply is racially predictable. And a caste system is not just about hierarchy, it is about extraction. Removing the punishment clause would not magically end mass incarceration, but it would remove the constitutional foundation that allows the state to treat incarcerated people as a labor caste. Reform would end forced labor, require fair wages, remove economic incentives to incarcerate, force states to redesign prisons around rehabilitation rather than extraction, and undercut the legal logic that has justified racialized punishment for 160 years. Several states, Colorado, Nebraska, Utah, Oregon, Tennessee, Vermont, have already removed similar clauses from their constitutions. The federal government has not. The resistance is not philosophical, it is economic. Everything else is an excuse peddled to the people, sold to the public, to prop up the prison industrial complex. Which I'd like to note that it is shocking if you look into it how many of our congresspeople are deeply invested in the prison industrial complex. But ending the punishment clause would require America to confront the fact that its prison system is not designed to reduce crime. It's designed to manage and exploit a racial underclass. In the end, a nation that claims to value freedom cannot maintain a constitutional clause that legalizes slavery. A nation that claims to value equality cannot maintain a system that criminalizes Black life to feed a labor market. A nation that claims to value justice cannot maintain a caste system built on the fiction of colorblind punishment. The punishment clause is not a relic, it is a design. And mass incarceration is not a failure of that design, it is the fulfillment of it. So, if America wants to end its racial caste system, it must begin by closing the loophole that made the system possible. The 13th Amendment must be rewritten so that slavery is illegal for everyone without exception. Only then can the country claim honestly that it abolished slavery at all.